Hello, I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP. And first and foremost, I would like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. The topic of this video will be on natural morality. And basically, what I want to do is explicate, or at the very least, I suppose I'll be making an argument for the natural basis of morality and ethics. Because in traditional Western thought, exclusively Christianity, God was the generator of morality and ethics, or at least the judge of such things, and those beliefs are still fairly instantiated within our culture, and it's why people are aghast at the thought, or why the argument that atheists can't be moral people or anything like that, or that anything outside of the Bible is poorly constructed moral mandates or simply a copy of the things, is commonly held and circulated in the American populace. And so I want to say primarily that morality is the domain of man and his nature, which is not to exclude any means of moral reflexivity on the part of human beings. And where I should start is this, that if one holds that a human being is a type of animal, then one has to hold that they do have some sort of evolutionary history, and that they do have an intrinsic palette of reflexes, motivations, and perceptual schemes that make them specifically what they are. And what I mean is this, is that if you look at any animal across the lexicon of the animal kingdom, if you will, what makes and groups each animal with itself are the various properties in its genetics, in its function, in its behavior and activity. The things that differentiate them from one another are the same items. So there's this underlying sort of current collection of items that make a thing what it is, because you can essentially winnow the human being down to a type of object that is an animal. And so if people are animals, they do have properties and aspects to their nature that make them that animal which is human. And so what should be firstly denoted is that there is, despite what constructivists say mostly, there is deep evolutionary instantiated items of motivation in people. It's no matter what culture you go to, people have some thought and idea about food, about relation, about sex, about status and being on top of a dominance hierarchy, about all of the sort of intrinsic and natural drives that pervades the human landscape. There's differences in customs, there's certainly differences in practices, but there's certainly differences in laws. But if you look at any society, it's kind of alarming the similarities amongst moral mandates, laws, and precepts. People speculate that that means that everything came from an original source, and I think that that's true for some of the Western sphere. And ideas certainly did get spread amongst people, but for the most part, it's simply this, that human migration patterns create the moral landscape that we see. It's the fact that everybody comes from the same stock and creed and place genetically, that we do have similar, at least from my vantage point, that we do have similar moral mandates and ethics about ourselves. because human beings fundamentally, though we differ in a multitude of ways, at the core we're so alike that there honestly is next to no differentiation between what one person cares about versus what another person cares about, in the sense that everybody is not social the same way, but everybody's a social animal. Everybody doesn't like the same food. Everybody doesn't eat the same kind of food. Everybody doesn't need to eat the same amount of food, but everybody eats. Everybody has to nourish themselves. Not everybody sleeps the same. Not everybody has the same habits and practices of inducing sleep, but everybody has to sleep. Not everybody gets angry about the same issues. Not everybody experiences resentment, envy, and disappointment for the same things. But everybody essentially experiences these things in some degree, in some variety. It's just that human beings, no matter how we differ locally or superficially, on the deepest levels, there's fundamental similarity that can just be looked at to say that there is a nature in us to contend with. A nature in human beings to contend with outside of temperament. People are a specific kind of thing. And being a specific kind of thing makes them, or makes us, look at the world a specific kind of way and act in it in a specific kind of way. And what I mean is, you take a bat, for example, and they have a different perceptual schema than we do. Obviously, they're auditorily based, where we are visually based creatures, and so their auditorily based perception causes them to have different functioning, obviously, physiologically, but also in terms of just their whole setup of their arrangements of dominance hierarchies, or what it would even mean, because most mammals, this is something that's instantiated in almost all mammal groups, have dominance hierarchies if they are in packs and groups, for example, and bats typically fester together in caves. But if anything has a dominance hierarchy, it has a metric in its way of being that tells it how it ought to be at the top of a dominance hierarchy. And bats have one that's different than people. Dogs have them, and they're different than what we flesh out for people. There are some similarities in terms of biggest dog, strongest dog, or loudest bark, or whatever you want to parsimony with, in terms of what we kind of innately do with embodied traits and wanting to put certain people at the top of dominance hierarchies nonetheless. But still, the deal is that there's similarities, but there's differentiation. And whatever similar items you could find between us and a bat, there's differences in terms of what they find relevant towards that interest or that need. For example, eating and food. I mean, there's certainly a lot. People will eat basically anything, so people definitely will consume insects, but I don't know. There's probably a people group somewhere in the world where the majority of their diet is insects. But at the very least in America, we don't eat that way. Most people don't. Also, we have to cook our foods. Bats don't have to cook their food. I mean, there's so much about what we do and how we do it that differs from a bat, but the thing is just the whole item of our existence makes all these differences amongst these similar or general factors in the salience of existence between the two of us. We both perceive the world, we both have to differentiate information and act on it, we both have to eat, we both want sex, we both want all of these similar things that come down to an organism's existence, but they differ. And so there's a difference in salience, there's a difference in relevancy, motivation, and interest between the two things, just because they are what they are. Just because a dog is what it is, it's going to be interested in the scent of other dogs and how they circle around fire hydrants. They're going to want to go out and sniff things and find items like the fecal matter of other animals interesting simply because they're olfactory based and they can smell things. And we see and we smell disgust when we look at those things, but dogs see and smell something completely different, and they even treat other animals' feces as perfume. There may be people that do that, I don't know. But the main crux of the point is this, that whatever you are determines how you act. Just point blank period. There's not an infinite array of possibilities in terms of action. That's one reason why I don't think there's a such thing as true relativism. Because true relativism would say that people can generate or create their own values. And that's not true. People can't really create what they value. There seems to be a landscape of values that you have innately as a person that you're not going to do a damn thing about. You're just not going to change them, and they're going to be there. So there can't be true relativism in the sense that people create their own values. People can create their own moral mandates and kind of how they want to act and pertain towards those values, but you have these things that are drives, and they're pulling you somewhere, and they're taking you somewhere, and you just simply decide how you want to act or respond in respects to them. But most people are not the masters of their house, is, I suppose, something that's worthy to note. More so, what that has to say is this, that if people can't create their own values, there's not an infinite array of action. Because if you could truncate, say maybe, the whole set of possible values that an organism can have, and then look at the set of values that people can have, it then makes an even smaller subset of actions that people can do in response towards those values, just to simply say and demonstrate that there's no infinitum. There's no any one way, like people like to say, well, there's a multitude of ways to do things. There's more than one way to do things, but there's not a multitude nor an any. Any isn't sufficient. Any or an infinite isn't possible. There's only a subset, and that subset may be large, but it's a subset nonetheless. So it's finite. And this is all to say that there's constraints. There's real constraints on what you can pay attention to, how long you can pay attention to something, what you decide to act on, how you can act. There's so much of what it means to be human that is a constriction to the person that people like to readily identify themselves as. But that's the first place I would like to start in saying that that is legitimately the basis for morality. Because we are what we are, and we act the way that we act because of what we are. Simply saying this, that human beings have natures, and given that nature, there are things that we prize and we value innately, and so we have the ability to either champion those anthropomorphic values or those structures that sit at the basis of our being, or we can deny them. And so you get into, you can have the right way to act, or you can have the wrong way to act. And suppose in a Darwinian analysis of it, one could say it's immoral to prematurely die. Or, you know, there's this funny thing on the internet, the Darwin Award. If you die in a stupid way, then it's almost morally wrong from a biological standpoint. And it's just to say that once you get to the place where there is something that it means to be human, and that's not something that's, even if it's based off of a series of chance happenings, isn't something that's trivial and something that definitely needs to be contended with, then there is an ought. There's a ought insofar as there's such a way you could behave to get what you want, and there's such a way you could behave to bring tragedy to yourself, but you basically get to choose the two things. There's further constraints put on what these oughts are based off of culture and all sorts of other funny number of items, where it would make it seem that life is relative, or morality is relative, and it is to a certain extent. But it's not insofar as this, that we all have to play this equilibrated game. That we all have to figure out, because we're social animals, how we fit in a dominance hierarchy in such a way to deal with the temperament and innate anthropomorphic nature that we all come with. And that's the struggle between, the Freudian struggle between the id, the ego, and the superego. But it's the basis for morality and why we have morality in the first place. Because morality, or more, is the collection of traditions and wisdom of how one ought to act in a given situation. At least that's what the Greek word means. Therefore, people have to, simply because we're social animals, and really there is honestly no damn choice, have to play this game of figuring out how they ought to act. And what are the best, since we're also abstracting agents, what are the best values to champion? Nietzsche proposed that we could create these values, but science and Carl Jung and Maslow and Carl Rogers and a whole host of other psychologists and philosophers really demonstrate that that's not possible, because people can't honestly create their own values. But what it seems that we can do is rediscover these values and figure out how these innate values best fit in the society that we're currently in, or the place that we're at in the apex and evolution of our knowledge, per se, in determining how it is we ought to live and we ought to exist, given what we innately value as people. It's to say that morality comes from the center of man. Morality is the domain of man, because he and she or she, man as in mankind, is the agent of action, because we are organisms and we come with a definite instantiated nature, and part of that definite instantiated nature is sociality, and we're going to find ourselves in groups and with others of our own kind, so we ought to figure out how to act, and we're going to have morality. And it's something that's going to naturally emerge, as it is an emergent phenomenon like creativity. So, in terms of what's the basis, the natural basis for moral reflexivity, it is the very fact that we're human. Epistemologically, or rather teleologically, I'm not, pragmatically, that's just the truth. And how that fits in terms of a debate between the right for moral reflexivity, as in between an atheist and a theologian, I'm not really sure, because I haven't thought about it to that extent, but there is an evolutionary basis for morality, and humans are fundamentally moral and ethical agents. Insofar as this, people want to know how to fit in a dominance hierarchy, and they want to know how they ought to act. They want to know the best way to act, given how they fit in a dominance hierarchy, and that's the landscape of morality and ethics. So, that's my video, and thank you for watching.